From Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I rise this morning to address the energy efficiency bill that we have been attempting to take up in this chamber, and in particular an amendment that I would like to offer to this bill. And I want to just strongly urge my colleagues, could we please get on this bill? I really wish we'd do some business here in the Senate. I think we're on our way to our second consecutive week where we have not had a single vote on a single legislative matter, at least not that I can remember. And we've got important legislative issues to deal with. I happen to think this is one of them. There are many others, but this is just not acceptable that we go on without addressing the challenges that we need to address for the sake of the people we represent, the American people. I want to talk about one small, particular, but important aspect of this. I have an amendment that I have filed, and I want to thank my co-sponsors, Senators Coburn, Flake, Risch, and Ayad, for joining me in this effort. It's an effort to repeal the renewable fuel standard, and I want to talk a little bit about why this is so important that we do this. First of all, the renewable fuel standard is an old law. It's on the books, and it requires, it's a federal government mandate that we burn certain amounts, a certain volume of ethanol in our gasoline. That's the mandate. We've gotten to the point where this year, this mandate will require that over 40% of all the corn we grow in America is going to be turned into ethanol and burned in our gasoline tanks, from our gasoline tanks in our automobiles. We are literally burning our food. That's what we're doing on a very, very large scale. And the way this law works is it requires increases every year in the amount of ethanol that we are forced to burn through our gasoline tanks. The fact is, Mr. President, this policy is harmful to our environment. It is unambiguously raising food prices. It makes it more expensive to fill up at the gas pump. And it's really threatening good-paying jobs in Pennsylvania and in other states. It's time for this to go, and what my amendment would do would be completely repeal this renewable fuel standard, which is overdue. And I know there's broad support for peeling this back, and I would hope that there's a majority in this body that would support this amendment if we could only get onto it. So I do very much hope we will. Let me explain just how problematic this is. First of all, let's remember the history, right? The whole idea behind creating this renewable fuel standard, behind forcing people to take corn, convert it into ethanol, and burn it in their car engine, the idea was that this was somehow going to be good for the environment. That was the idea at the time that it passed. In fact, it is clear that this is bad for the environment. This is counterproductive just purely from an environmental point of view. The Environmental Working Group, for instance, put out a statement. They have said on the record, and I quote, "The rapid expansion of corn ethanol production has increased greenhouse gas emissions, worsened air and water pollution, and driven up the price of food and feed." This is the Environmental Working Group that came to that conclusion. It is widely acknowledged that using corn ethanol instead of gasoline actually creates more carbon dioxide emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions that many people are very concerned about. You have more of that when you burn ethanol than if you burned gasoline. In fact, the Clean Air Task Force estimates that carbon emissions from corn ethanol between 2015 and 2044 on the path that we're on now would exceed 1.4 billion tons, and that's 300 million tons more than if all of that instead were, if the energy were supplied by gasoline instead. So it's counterproductive from a carbon emission point of view. We have a chart here that quotes a conclusion from a study at Stanford University that indicates the harm that ethanol does directly to human health, right? Vehicles running on ethanol will generate higher concentrations of ozone, which is a harmful gas. Higher concentrations of ozone than those using gasoline, especially in the wintertime. And finally, in 2011, the National Academy of Sciences stated, and I quote, "Projected air quality effects from ethanol fuel would be more damaging to human health than those from gasoline use." Okay, so I understand there was a time when we didn't know these things, when we had a different impression about the health and the air quality implications of using ethanol. But we don't have that excuse anymore. It is now clear that using ethanol instead of gasoline is net harmful to the environment and harmful to human health. That's a pretty good reason to reconsider this all by itself, but there are more reasons. One is the fact that it's more expensive to produce ethanol than it is to produce gasoline. So not only is this harmful to our health, but it costs more to do it. The Wall Street Journal estimated that in 2014, the renewable fuel standard will increase the per gallon cost of gasoline by anywhere from 10 to 25 cents. That adds up. That could be over $300 a year on average for the average family. It's billions of dollars across our economy. That is a deadweight loss. No good thing comes out of that extra cost. It just reduces the standard of living of everybody who's forced to bear that cost. And then in addition to increasing fuel prices, it increases food prices, which stands to reason if you take 40% of all the corn that's produced in America and you burn it, well, there's that much less corn that's available for food. And corn is an incredibly basic and important source of food, both directly and indirectly. This phenomenon alone, the diversion of corn for ethanol production, is deemed by many scholars who've looked at this as costing maybe as much as a full percentage point a year for the average family. That's on the order of over $150 per year that we force people to pay in the form of higher food prices alone. Another example is the indirect way in which higher corn prices filter into the rest of the economy. The fact is, feed grain is typically half the cost of raising livestock, and corn is the dominant feed grain in America. The USDA's chief economist stated that the renewable fuel standard increases corn prices between 30 and 40%. And it got so bad, it got so absurd, that in 2012, Mr. President, there were farmers feeding their cattle candy because it was cheaper to buy candy than to buy corn. How absurd is this? That a federal government policy is driving this kind of behavior. It makes no sense at all. Here's another fact about ethanol. Fact is, it's harmful to motors. It's harmful to engines. The reciprocating piston engines that we use in our vehicles and motorcycles and boat engines and others, they're designed to burn gasoline. They're not designed to burn ethanol. And the EPA has acknowledged this, that ethanol is harmful to these engines because ethanol is corrosive. There's more water gets dissolved in the ethanol. The EPA has acknowledged this. Unlike other fuel components, ethanol is corrosive. It's that water mixture that does damage to engines. The AAA has warned that raising ethanol content in fuel further, which is what current law has in store for us, it'll damage 95% of the cars on the road today. And then the last thing I would point out, Mr. President, is that this policy threatens good-paying jobs. There's no question. I visited a refinery in southeastern Pennsylvania, a refinery that employs hundreds of workers in good-paying jobs, providing the gasoline that we need to move our economy, to move our families, to get to and from work, and to do all the things we need to do in life. Well, the fact is, their ability to be a viable, ongoing refinery is jeopardized. It's threatened by the renewable fuel standard. I want to read you a letter that I got from the Philadelphia AFL-CIO business manager, a gentleman named Pat Gillespie, whose concern is the job security of the workers he represents. And I'm going to quote from his letter to me. He says, "A resurrected refinery in Traynor, Pennsylvania." That's right, it's resurrected. This is my aside. This was a refinery that was shuttered and in danger of never reopening, and it took an amazing effort by the stakeholders in this community to make this viable, and it is viable right now, and it's employing hundreds of workers in Delaware County. But the point that Mr. Gillespie makes is that our resurrected refinery in Traynor, Pennsylvania, once again needs your intercession. The impact of the dramatic spike in the cost of RIN credits. Now, the RIN credit is the system by which the EPA enforces compliance with these renewable fuel standards. It's too complicated to get into, but it is part of the counterproductive economics of this. So to get back to Mr. Gillespie's letter, the impact of the dramatic spike in the cost of the RIN credits from 4 cents to $1 per gallon will cause a tremendous depression in our refinery's bottom line in 2013. Of course, at the building trades, we need them to have economic vitality to bring about the construction and maintenance projects that our members depend on. And the steel workers, of course, need the economic vitality so they can maintain and expand their jobs with the refinery. We need your assistance, your help with this matter. Well, I want to provide the help that they need, that Pennsylvanians need, that we all need from this ill-conceived policy that clearly has no place in the United States anymore. The help is in the form of this amendment. This amendment solves the problem. It repeals this ill-conceived standard completely. It would go away. I know there's bipartisan support for this amendment. I have several colleagues who've co-sponsored this amendment. This is our opportunity to pass this amendment. As I've said, and let me just to recap, this is just bad policy on every possible front. The renewable fuel standards, the forcing us to burn so much of our corn in the form of ethanol is harmful to our environment. It's harmful to human health. It increases food prices. It increases fuel prices at the pump. It damages the engines that we rely on, and it jeopardizes jobs. What more arguments do we need to bring an end to this misguided program? We know this. We've known this for some time. Now is the time to act. So, Mr. President, I'm just urging my colleagues, let's get on the bill. Let's have amendments. Let's have lots of amendments. If we'd spent the last week mowing down amendments instead of arguing about them, we'd be done by now. We could have processed many dozens of amendments easily. And one of them could have been this one. Well, I don't think it's too late. We could still get on this bill. We could still do something that would be very, very sensible for our environment, for our economy, for consumers, for our health, for the sake of our jobs. Let's repeal the renewable fuel standards. Let's do it by adopting my amendment, and let's do that by getting on this bill. And Mr. President, I yield the floor.